My daughter said, "I need freedom," then flew to Europe for a month, and left me with our 1-year-old granddaughter. When she finally came back, what she saw made her collapse. No, I didn't mean to abandon her like this. I didn't rescue her. I didn't comfort her. I did something harder. I set a boundary. I made her face the weight of her choice, and that one decision, that single act of tough love, saved both of them. This is the story of how protecting someone you love sometimes looks like cruelty, but it's actually the deepest form of compassion. Hello everyone, welcome to our story. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and let us know where you're watching from. And please note, this story contains fictional elements to enhance the educational experience. Any character names or settings that match real life are purely coincidental, but the message love equals responsibility is completely true. My daughter called it finding herself. But when she told me she'd be handing over her 1-year-old for a month while she and her husband chased some European fantasy, I should have seen it coming, all of it. The announcement came over breakfast that Saturday morning, casual as ordering coffee. Rebecca and Colin sat across the kitchen table from me, Violet in her high chair, mashing banana into a smile. Rebecca said, that particular tone creeping in, the one that meant she'd already decided. "We've booked a trip. Europe. 4 weeks." I looked up from my omelet. Europe. Paris, Rome, the Amalfi Coast. Colin added his hand, sliding across the table to find Rebecca's, except it didn't really find hers. It just existed there. A gesture without intention. "And Violet?" I asked. Rebecca's eyes didn't quite meet mine. "That's where you come in. We were hoping you'd, No. Dad, Rebecca, no. You can't just hand off a 1-year-old and pretend you're footloose and fancy-free. She needs her mother. She needs to know we're not just her parents." Rebecca said, her voice rising that particular shade of defensive. "Colin and I need to remember why we're together. We need to find ourselves again." Find themselves. As if losing yourself in your own marriage was inevitable, like gravity. As if responsibility was something you could escape if you just bought the right plane ticket. "What you need," I said quietly, "is to face what's actually broken instead of running from it." Colin's jaw tightened. He looked out the window, suddenly fascinated by the neighbor's fence. That's when I knew the way he wouldn't look at Rebecca, the way his hand had dropped from hers. Something was already broken. But it wasn't my job to fix it. By 2 in the afternoon, the argument had metastasized from the kitchen to the living room. Rebecca paced like a cornered animal, her voice sharp and thin. "You don't understand, Dad. I'm not the person I was when I had Violet. I forgot who I am." "You're her mother," I said. "That's who you are now." "I'm not just a mother. I'm more than that." "Of course you are. But for the next 18 years, you're also responsible for keeping a human being alive. That doesn't pause so you can go find yourself in some Italian piazza." She turned away from me, arms crossed. "You're not going to support me in this." It wasn't a question. "No," I said. "I'm not." But by 5 o'clock, standing in her bedroom doorway, while she shoved clothes haphazardly into a suitcase, I realized my opposition had already become background noise. She'd made her mind up. Colin had made his by his silence, his distance, his already packed bags waiting in the garage. The decision was made before she even told me. That's when Amber showed up. Rebecca's younger sister burst through the front door, like she'd been launched from a Canon designer sunglasses, pushed up into her straightened blonde hair, phone already in hand. "Oh my God, oh my God!" Amber squealed, throwing her arms around Rebecca. "This is going to be insane. Like the content we can pull from this." The aesthetic alone, Rebecca reclaiming her identity, the romantic European escape. The lighting in the Colosseum at golden hour. She was already filming on her phone, turning to catch Rebecca's profile against the bedroom window. This is absolutely going to go viral. Rebecca laughed, actually laughed in a way I hadn't heard in months. Amber had a gift for that, for making you feel like whatever you were doing was exactly right, exactly important. "You're going to post the whole thing?" I asked. "Of course," Amber said. "It's her journey. People need to see this." I thought about Violet downstairs, gnawing on a teething ring. I thought about her asking for her mother in 2 weeks. 2 weeks of silence, and then suddenly Violet would stop asking. She'd understand on some cellular level that asking didn't bring Rebecca back. That was the real journey nobody was filming. The next morning came too early. Rebecca drove Colin beside her, while I sat in the back seat next to Violet. The pre-dawn was purple and empty. Nobody talked much. There was nothing left to say that hadn't already been said into the ground. At the departure's drop-off, Rebecca unclipped Violet from her car seat and held her close for a moment. "Our granddaughter, my granddaughter." For the next month, put her small hand on Rebecca's shoulder, confused about the pre-dawn departure, the rushed goodbye. Mama Violet asked a question that contained everything. "Where are you going? When are you coming back?" Why, Rebecca kissed the top of her head. "Mommy's coming back soon, baby. Grandpa's going to take such good care of you." She handed Violet to me like she was passing off a baton in a race I'd never agreed to run. "Rebecca," I said, my last attempt at the person she used to be, "please think about this, please." "I love you, Dad," she said. "But I need this." She didn't say it like it was negotiable. She said it like it was already done. Colin pulled the car out with Rebecca in the passenger seat, and I stood there holding Violet, watching taillights blur into the morning traffic, watching the promise to return disappear around the corner toward the highway. Violet's small body went stiff in my arms, and I could feel the moment she understood, really understood, that something had changed. "Mama," she asked again, softer this time, a question becoming a statement of fact. "Grandpa's here," I told her and held her tighter. As I watched the car turn the last corner toward the airport, I didn't know that month would rewrite everything. I didn't know about the fever, the hospital, the late-night conversations with lawyers. I didn't know that love and protection weren't always the same thing, or that sometimes you had to choose between them. All I knew, standing in that parking lot with Violet's weight in my arms, was that my daughter had left me with something far more fragile and far more real than whatever she thought she'd find in Europe. And I had no idea how to keep it safe. The first morning without them, I woke at 5 and thought I could do this. The darkness was complete, the kind that only existed before dawn. My bedroom was the same as it had been for 7 years, Mary's reading glasses still on the nightstand. The silence felt like permission to believe I could manage alone. By 6, the illusion ended. Violet's cry came through the monitor like an alarm, not a soft whimper. This was the keen of actual distress, teething pain that made no sense to her small mind. I found her in the crib, tears streaming her hands, clawing at her mouth. I changed her diaper with more confusion than competence. The tabs didn't cooperate. She squirmed. I fumbled, and then she laughed, a genuine surprised laugh at how badly I was botching this simple task. It was the first time I'd heard her laugh since her mother drove away. The formula came next, too hot at first, then too cold. By the time I got it right, Violet was wailing again. But when I held her close and let her take the bottle, she settled into my chest with a weight that felt like trust. At 8:15, I texted Rebecca, "Good morning. How is Europe?" 8 hours passed before she answered. A photo of a Parisian cafe, the morning sun golden on white tablecloths. Her face bright with relief I hadn't seen in months. The caption read, "Finally getting to breathe." No question about Violet. No, how is she? Just the luxury of her own oxygen, and the implication that she'd been suffocating here with us. By the second day, the hardware store became a monument to my incompetence. I couldn't leave Violet with a stranger, so I brought her with me, her portable crib set up in the back office, her toys scattered where customers could see them. The rhythm of the business I'd run for 43 years suddenly felt impossible to maintain. Tony Rossi found me at the register on the third afternoon. He was one of my oldest employees, a man who'd worked with me long enough to know when not to ask questions. "Boss," he said quietly, "you need help." "I'm managing fine," I said, though my voice was hoarse. "You're not managing," Tony said. It wasn't unkind. "Let me watch her. You help Mrs. Patterson." I almost refused. Pride is a stubborn thing in old men. But Mrs. Patterson was waiting, and Violet had started to fuss again, and I was too tired to fight. The customers' reactions came in two varieties. Some brought over toys from their own grandchildren, shaking their heads at the unfairness. Others looked at me like I was a man trying to do a job beyond his age, their judgment almost worse than their sympathy. "Where's her mother?" one woman asked as I rang up her nails. "In Europe." "For how long?" "A month." The woman's eyebrows climbed. What she meant was, how could she do that? I didn't have an answer. On the fourth day, George showed up. George Nathaniel was my wife's younger brother, though we'd been in each other's lives long enough that the word brother had stopped being technical. He was 68, built like a man who'd done physical work his whole life, with silver in his beard and eyes that didn't miss much. "Rosalind told me you had the baby," he said, stepping into the store with the easy confidence of a man who belonged. "Word travels fast." He looked around the shop, then back at me. "Shu, how are you holding up?" "I'm fine," I said. George gave me a look that made it clear he'd heard the lie. "You've got that gray around the edges, Walter. The look of a man running on fumes." "She's only been gone 3 days." "Exactly." He moved toward where Violet was playing with blocks. "You need help. Rosalind and I are taking her some afternoons, so you can breathe." There was no negotiation in his voice. It was the kind of offer that came from a place deeper than politeness. I wanted to refuse. I wanted to prove something, but Violet looked up at George with sudden interest, and I realized I didn't have the luxury of my pride anymore. "Thank you," I said. George put a hand on my shoulder. "That's what family does." By the 6th day, Violet was inconsolable. She'd moved past teething pain into exhaustion that had no solution. She cried for hours while I held her against my chest, my own helplessness matching hers. That night, when nothing worked, I found myself singing. It was a lullaby Mary used to sing to Rebecca, a song my mother had sung to me, generations of love poured into a simple melody. I hadn't sung it since Mary died. The grief had been too much. But Violet needed something old, something that carried weight and intention. Something that said, "You are loved. You are safe." I held her close and let the song pour out of me, rusty and imperfect. Slowly, her crying quieted. Her small body went heavy against mine. By the third verse, she was asleep, her thumb in her mouth, her breath evening out into true rest. I stood in the darkness for a long time after that, not moving. And in that stillness, something shifted. A recognition of my own smallness, how fragile we all were. My 70-year-old heart, Violet's vulnerable body, Rebecca's precarious marriage spiraling on the other side of the Atlantic. How easily everything could disappear. That night alone in my own bed, I couldn't sleep. My chest felt tight in a way that wasn't quite physical. I thought about Mary. I thought about Rebecca running toward something she thought would save her. I thought about Violet, who had no choice but to trust the people who stayed. And I understood, lying in that darkness, that this month would change everything. Not as a trial I could survive, but as a revelation that love and protection were the entire point. When Violet cried for her mother in the days to come and she would, I couldn't fix it with bottles and diapers, because her mother had chosen something else. All I could do was make sure her daughter never forgot that someone had stayed. By day 9, my body started showing signs I'd never seen before. Violet's fever came without warning. I woke to find her hot to the touch, her small face flushed a deep crimson. The thermometer read 39.3, 102.8 in the old measurements. My mind went white with panic. I called Rebecca immediately. She answered on the third ring background noise suggesting a cafe or plaza. Violet has a fever. I'm taking her to urgent care. Oh no, poor baby. Rebecca said, her voice floating and distant. Let me know what the doctor says. And then she was gone, her attention already returning to whatever wine or pastry was in front of her. No questions. No, what are her other symptoms? Or, call me back after the appointment. Just the expectation that I would handle it and report back when it was convenient for her to hear. Dr. Kenneth Webb was in his mid-50s, the kind of doctor who still actually looked at his patients. He examined Violet thoroughly, ears, throat, lymph nodes, while I stood there feeling like a man watching his worst fears materialize in real time. She's teething, doctor, Webb said, finally looking at Violet's swollen gums. Low-grade viral fever. Could be a minor infection. She'll be fine in a few days with rest and fluids. The fever is her immune system doing its job. Relief flooded through me so complete it made my knees weak. But then Dr. Webb turned to me. Now let's check on you. I'm fine, I said automatically. Humor me. He took my blood pressure, waited, took it again. His jaw tightened slightly. 158/95, he said quietly. When was the last time you slept 2-3 hours a night? And before that, days with actual rest? I couldn't remember. The past 9 days had been a blur of bottles and diapers and store shifts and Violet's cries echoing through a house that suddenly felt too small. Doctor Webb set down his instrument and looked at me directly. I've treated a lot of patients like you, Walter. Grandparents raising grandchildren. People who think they can just push through. And I'm going to be very direct with you what you're doing right now. The stress, the sleep deprivation, the constant anxiety, it will kill you. The words hung in the small examination room. Your heart is already compensating, he continued. That elevated blood pressure, that racing pulse, these are signs that your cardiovascular system is under strain. You need to get help. Real help. Not just your brother-in-law coming by a few afternoons a week. He handed me a business card. If you need to talk to someone, call me anytime. I mean that. I took the card like it was a lifeline. That night, I lay next to Violet's crib, listening to her breathe. Shallow. Even. The fever had broken by evening, and she drifted into an exhausted sleep, her body finally surrendering to rest. But I couldn't sleep. Instead, I lay there thinking, if I died, what would happen to her? Would Rebecca come back? Would she stay? Or would Violet end up in some system, passed between relatives who loved her, but couldn't quite make room? I pulled out my laptop at 2 a.m. and searched sudden heart attack symptoms in older men. Custody rights for grandparents. What happens to a child if both parents are unavailable? The internet offered no comfort, only statistics and worst-case scenarios. Around 3, I fell into a broken sleep. The nightmare came fast and terrible. I was in the house, but it wasn't the house. The walls were closing in, the rooms impossibly small. Violet was crying, but I couldn't find her. Her voice echoed from everywhere and nowhere. Walter, Walter. I was running through the halls, my heart pounding, and then I was on the ground. My chest was crushing inward. I couldn't breathe. I was dying right there in the darkness, and Violet was still calling my name. When I woke, I was soaked in sweat. My heart was hammering against my ribs so hard I thought it might break through. For a moment, I couldn't remember where I was. Couldn't remember if I was alive or dead. The machine beside me started beeping. Loud, insistent. A nurse ran in, young and quick. "Walter, Walter, can you hear me? Your heart rate spiked. Just breathe. You're okay." "Violet," I gasped. "Where's Violet?" "Your granddaughter is with your brother-in-law. She's safe. She's fine. You had a nightmare." But the terror didn't leave even after I understood. It stayed with me, thick and suffocating, a reminder that I wasn't in control of anything anymore. That death wasn't theoretical. It was waiting, patient and real, ready to take me before I'd made sure she was safe. The next day, Rebecca sent a selfie. Golden light behind her, the Eiffel Tower, sharp and beautiful. She was smiling, her hair done, a glass of wine in her hand. The caption read, "Finally living my best life, Collins at a museum, I'm doing wine and shopping." Not a single question about Violet. Not a check-in about the fever. Just the casual documentation of her liberation, as if the fact that her daughter's grandfather had almost died in the night was irrelevant to her joy. I set the phone down and sat in the silence of my kitchen, feeling something shift inside me. Not anger exactly, something colder, clearer. A recognition that this couldn't continue. By day 12, I started checking the finances. I needed to pay some bills, so I pulled up the joint account, the one Rebecca and Colin still had access to, the one they'd relied on for their European adventure. I wasn't looking for proof, but I found it anyway. Milan, $485 for dinner. $329 to upgrade their hotel room. $150 at a wine bar. $200 for shopping. Another $300 withdrawn as cash. Daily spending that hovered between $400 and $500. I did the math. $3,500 a week. While I was calculating whether I could afford the premium formula Violet preferred, while I was tallying the cost of her diapers, roughly $200 a week, all from my account. The disparity was staggering. Rebecca was spending 17 times what I was spending on her own daughter's basic care. On day 14, Tony found me staring at the register without seeing it. "Boss, you look like you're carrying the weight of the world." I told him. About Violet's fever, about Dr. Webb's warning, about the nightmare, about the spending. All of it poured out like something that had been dammed up too long. Tony listened without interrupting. When I finished, he just nodded slowly. "You're gonna have to protect yourself, sir, for her sake, because if you go down, she's got nobody." That night, I sat at my kitchen table with a pad of paper and started writing down everything. Every receipt, every charge, every moment of Rebecca's absence documented in the digital record of her spending. I wasn't just a grandfather protecting a granddaughter anymore. I was a man preparing for a war, and for the first time I understood that protecting Violet might mean turning against the person who'd given birth to her. Tony found me in the back room on day 13 with 2 cups of coffee from the cafe down the street. "Sit," he said. We worked in silence before Tony asked what had probably been building for days. "What's eating at you, boss?" I told him everything. About Rebecca's expensive hotels and restaurants in her stories. About checking the joint account and finding the hemorrhage $500 a day while I was calculating whether Violet could have premium formula or store brand. Tony listened without interrupting. When I finished, he set down his coffee. "I need to tell you something," he said quietly. Tony's grandmother had raised him. His mother left when he was 6 months old. His grandmother took him in without hesitation. She worked nights cleaning office buildings, came home, took care of him. For 18 years. She barely slept. Tony said, his voice rougher than I'd ever heard it. Never complained, just did what needed doing. He paused. She had a heart attack at 56. Right there at the office, mopping some CEO's bathroom. They said it was stress, years of stress, taking care of everything alone. I didn't know what to say. I was angry at her for leaving me, Tony continued. Then I got older and realized I was angry at myself because she was right there suffering and I didn't see it. He leaned forward. You remind me of her boss. You see what needs doing and you just do it. But you're not her. You don't have 18 years. What are you saying? I asked. You need a lawyer, not to punish Rebecca, to protect yourself, so you can keep protecting Violet. He paused. And if you need someone to watch her after hours so you can sleep, I'm here. No charge. I spent the next 3 days thinking about Tony's grandmother, about a woman who'd lived a life of sacrifice that ended in a bathroom. I couldn't let that happen to me. Not on Violet's watch. On day 16, I called Rebecca. She answered on the 4th ring, her voice carrying the tone of someone interrupted mid-leisure. Hi, Dad, she said. Everything okay with Violet? Rebecca listened to me. Your daughter needs diapers and formula. I'm buying them while you're spending $500 a day on wine and shopping. She was quiet. That's my money, Dad. I'm using my own account. From the joint account that's supposed to cover emergencies for your family. You left your 1-year-old with a 70-year-old man, and you're spending like you're on vacation. You are on vacation. Your daughter needs her mother. I need this time. Violet needs you, I said, and my voice came out harder than I'd intended. Her actual mother, here, present. I'm coming back in 2 weeks, Dad. I'm not abandoning her. But you are, I said quietly. You're choosing yourself over her, and I'm done watching that happen. I'm getting a lawyer, Rebecca. We're going to discuss custody. She hung up on me. I sat with the phone in my hand, my heart racing in that dangerous way. I had said something that couldn't be unsaid, and I meant every word. At 3 a.m. on day 17, I stood in my study with the documents. Temporary custody petition, financial statements, everything organized and waiting for a signature. I wasn't sure I had the right to give. Violet was asleep in the next room. I could hear her soft breathing through the monitor, the sound of a child who'd never asked for any of this. I thought about Mary, about the way she'd approached difficult decisions with clarity, with the absolute certainty that responsibility wasn't optional, even when it cost you everything. I picked up the pen. My hand shook as I positioned it over the signature line. This wasn't just a document. This was me, 70 years old, breaking my promise to my daughter in order to keep my promise to her child. This was me choosing a war I didn't want to fight, but I was fighting it anyway. I signed. My signature looked shaky on the page, evidence of my uncertainty and my resolve tangled together. I walked to the doorway of Violet's room. She was sleeping on her back, one small arm thrown over her blanket. I sat on the edge of her crib and cried not from sadness, but from the weight of it, from understanding finally that love sometimes meant being the villain in someone else's story. When I could breathe again, I whispered to her sleeping form, I'm sorry, baby, but Grandpa is going to keep you safe, even if your mother hates me for it. I went back to the study and placed the documents in an envelope already addressed to the lawyer's office. In the morning, I would mail them. The moment they were received, I would become the man who filed against his own daughter. But I would be a man who'd done it for the right reasons, for the only person in this house who couldn't protect herself. Day 17. 3 a.m, I signed away my relationship with my daughter to protect her granddaughter. By day 18, my body was collecting its debt. I'd slept 3 hours, not consecutive, fragments. An hour on the couch around 4 in the morning after signing the papers. Another hour and a half in my bed, waking every 20 minutes to the phantom sound of Violet crying. The last 30 minutes around 6, when exhaustion finally overpowered anxiety. It wasn't enough. The store was failing. Inventory was dangerously low because I hadn't been ordering, too distracted, with Violet too tired to make decisions. 2 of my employees had called in sick. A customer complaint from earlier in the week was still sitting in my email unanswered. I stood at the shop counter at 7 in the morning, looking at the state of things, and thought, I'm failing at everything. By mid-afternoon, I was on a ladder restocking the top shelves. Barbara Stone. My manager had Violet in the back office watching her while I tried to make myself useful. The store was quiet, just the hum of the fluorescent lights and the weight of my own exhaustion. My chest had been tight since I woke up. Not the warning kind of tight from weeks ago. This was different, persistent, a kind of heaviness that sat behind my breastbone like something was nesting there. I told myself it was stress. That's when my chest seized. Not a dull ache, a tightening like something was wrapping around my heart and squeezing. I gripped the ladder. My vision blurred. The tools on the shelf seemed to shimmer and double. "Boss," someone called. Tony. He was below me looking up. I tried to answer but couldn't form words. My shoulder burned. My left arm felt heavy like it didn't belong to my body anymore. The ladder swayed. The store tilted. I was falling. Tony caught me, literally caught me, as I tumbled off the ladder, his hands hooking under my arms, breaking my fall. We both went down hard, my weight driving him to the ground, but he cushioned my impact. "Call 911, he shouted. I gasped for air. My heart was racing at a pace that felt inhuman, like a bird throwing itself against the walls of a cage. Barbara came running with Violet in her arms, took one look at me and dialed. The ambulance was there in 8 minutes. They strapped me to a gurney, fitted an oxygen mask over my face, and I remember the plastic smell of it, the way the oxygen felt cold in my lungs. One of the paramedics was talking to me, asking my name, my age when the pain started, but his voice sounded like it was coming from underwater. All I could think about was Violet. If my heart stopped before we got to the hospital, who would tell her? How would Barbara explain it? How would she understand that Grandpa wasn't coming back and Rebecca, she was somewhere over the Atlantic? George would have to call her. Rebecca would come back to a dead father and a granddaughter she'd barely known for a month. No, I thought, watching the paramedic check something on the monitor beside me. Not like this. Not now. The emergency room smelled like disinfectant and fluorescent lights hum. They ran me through the gauntlet EKG blood work chest X-ray. I was stripped of my clothes and dressed in a hospital gown that left me exposed from the back. A nurse inserted an IV into my arm, while another asked me rapid-fire questions about my medical history, current medications, family history. "Heart problems?" she asked. "My mother had hypertension," I said. "But she lived to 87. And you?" "I'm 70. Good health until now." The irony was bitter. After what felt like hours, Dr. Kenneth Webb walked into the room. He was still in his regular clothes, not hospital scrubs, which meant I'd been brought to his ER for some terrible reason of timing. Walter," he said, unsurprised. "I had a feeling I'd see you here." "Is it—" I couldn't finish. "Your heart is under extreme stress. The EKG shows some arrhythmia, irregular rhythm, combined with your blood pressure, which is dangerously elevated, and what appears to be a stress-induced event. We're looking at a serious situation." "How serious?" I whispered. "At your age with these factors, Walter, the combination of stress and physical exhaustion you're experiencing could result in sudden cardiac death. Your heart could stop at any moment." The words seemed to echo in the small room. "You need to be admitted for observation tonight. We're going to monitor you continuously. In the morning, we'll have more test results, and I want you to see a cardiologist. But I need you to understand something. You cannot continue like this. The stress you're under is literally killing you." I nodded, not trusting my voice. "I mean it," Dr. Webb said. "You need help. Real help. You can't carry this alone." By the next evening, my room was full of people. George and Rosalind arrived before visiting hours officially ended, their faces creased with worry. Tony had called George the moment I went down at the store, so they'd been waiting for hours. George hugged me, really hugged me, careful of the monitors and IV lines, but holding me like he thought I might disappear if he let go. "You scared us half to death," he said. "I'm sorry," I said, and meant it. Barbara brought Violet just before sunset. I watched my great-granddaughter process the scene, the bed, the machines beeping rhythmically around me, the wires connected to my chest. Her small face crumpled. "Grandpa?" she whimpered. "I'm okay, sweetheart," I said, reaching out. George carefully lifted her onto the bed beside me. She crawled into my arms, and I held her close, breathing in the vanilla smell of her baby shampoo, feeling her heartbeat against my chest. But I was lying. I wasn't okay. My heart had nearly stopped. The doctor had said it could stop again at any moment, and this child, this 1-year-old who'd been handed to me a month ago, was now looking at me with tears in her eyes. Because she understood on some level her vocabulary couldn't articulate that something was very wrong. Sitting on a hospital bed, holding Violet, while machines monitored the erratic beating of my heart, I understood something that should have been obvious from the beginning. I'd been so focused on protecting her that I'd forgotten the most basic requirement: staying alive. If my heart actually stopped and the doctor's words echoed in my mind, Violet would lose everyone. Rebecca had already abandoned her, and now if I died, she'd be alone. All my careful plans, all my legal documents filed at 3 a.m, all my determination to protect her from her mother's selfishness, it would mean nothing if I wasn't here to see it through. The machines beeped their steady rhythm around us. Violet fell asleep in my arms, her small weight precious and fragile. And I understood finally that the most important thing I could do for my granddaughter was not fight for custody. It was stay alive. The phone rang the morning after I woke up in a hospital bed, with machines monitoring every unreliable beat of my heart. "Walter," Father James Whitmore said without preamble, "I'm coming to see you." I wanted to refuse, but before I could speak, he added, "George told me about the custody petition. We need to talk about that." Father James arrived that afternoon carrying the weight of 30 years of regret. He was 65, with the kind of quiet authority that came from spending decades listening to people's worst moments and worst choices. But today, he was the one confessing. "I had a brother," he said, sitting in the chair beside my hospital bed. "He left his family when he was 32, walked out one day and never came back. My parents begged me to be gentle with him when he called to leave the door open to give him space to figure himself out." He paused, looking at his hands. "I chose compassion over boundaries. I told my parents not to push him, that he needed to find his own way. My nephew, his son, stopped asking about his father around age 7, gave up hope." Father James looked at me directly. "My brother died 12 years ago. Never reconciled with his son. My nephew is now in his 40s, and he's still angry, still broken. Because I thought forgiveness meant accepting abandonment." "You couldn't have known," I started. "I should have known," he said firmly. "What I'm telling you, Walter, is that sometimes love requires you to draw a line. Temporary custody isn't punishment. It's a boundary. And Violet needs to know that abandonment has consequences, not as cruelty, but as truth." He stood to leave. "You're doing the right thing. Don't second-guess yourself." The next morning, Claudia Morrison walked into my hospital room with a leather briefcase and compassionate eyes. She was 55, elegant in a way that suggested she'd fought hard for everything she had. Her divorce story came out naturally as she reviewed the temporary custody petition. "My ex-husband was like Rebecca," she said, not unkindly. "Charming, self-centered, convinced the world revolved around his needs. When I filed for custody, he told people I was being vindictive, told my own family I was being cruel." She adjusted her glasses. 17 years later, my daughter is thriving, and he still thinks I wronged him." She slid the document across the bedside table. "This isn't punishment, Walter. It's protection. If anything happened to you, Violet would have legal standing. Her mother couldn't just materialize and claim her without going through the courts." I looked at the signature line. My hands were shaking. "What if Rebecca hates me?" I asked. "She probably will," Claudia said gently. "But Violet will be safe. And in 5 years, when Violet is old enough to understand, she'll know that her grandfather loved her enough to be the villain in her mother's story." On the morning of the 21st day, Barbara Stone sat across from me with a file folder thick with documentation. 20 years, she said without preamble. "That's how long I worked for Child Protective Services before I came to manage the hardware store." I hadn't known this about her. Barbara had always been competent, quiet, reliable. But this changed how I understood her. "What you're describing, Rebecca, leaving a 1-year-old with you for a month, spending money without regard for the child's needs, not checking in, this isn't abuse," Barbara said carefully. "But it is abandonment. It's neglect not of the body but of the spirit." She opened the folder. Inside were the documents I'd compiled, credit card statements, showing Rebecca's daily spending timestamps of her messages, the financial gap between what she was spending and what I was spending on Violet's care. "These are good," Barbara said. "Court will see a clear pattern. Not malice, just indifference. That's actually more damning than anger." She pulled out another document. "I want to tell you something else. My mother did what you're doing when I was 3. Refused to let my father take me on a 6-month soul-finding trip. He was furious. Said she was controlling, cruel, unforgiving." Barbara paused. "I'm here today because she set that boundary. I know it, because I remember him trying to pick me up from school when I was 7, and my mother saying no. I remember her protecting me from his selfishness." She looked at me directly. "You're doing that for Violet. You're being the adult." Just as Barbara was leaving, Mrs. Ann Kirkland arrived with a basket of food. She was in her 60s with the kind of weathered face that suggested a life of giving. She sat on the edge of my bed, and without preamble, she started crying. I have a granddaughter I haven't seen in 8 years," she said, her voice breaking. "My daughter left her with me for a few months when she was 2. Months turned into a year. I was too soft, too willing to believe she'd come back, that she was just going through a phase." Anne's hands trembled as she spoke. "When she finally did come back, she threatened legal action, said I'd brainwashed the child against her. I was so afraid of being seen as cruel that I gave her back without fighting through the courts, without protecting my granddaughter legally." She looked at me with wet eyes. "I haven't seen Emma in 8 years, Walter. She's 10 now, and the last thing she said to me was, 'Grandma, why aren't you keeping me?' Because she understood, even as a child, that my refusal to fight was a refusal to protect her." Anne reached over and squeezed my hand. "Don't be me. Please, fight for her." On the 22nd day, I signed the temporary custody order. Claudia was there, George was there, and the pen in my hand felt like it weighed 1,000 pounds. I thought of Mary, of the day she'd held newborn Rebecca in the hospital. That absolute certainty in her eyes that she would do anything, sacrifice anything, to keep that child safe. "This is love, Walter," Claudia said quietly, watching my hesitation. Sometimes love wears the face of protection. I signed. From day 22 to day 25, the support system activated like a network no one knew existed. George helped me set up a new bank account, separate from the one Rebecca had access to. Rosalind and Anne Kirkland came by in shifts caring for Violet while I recovered. The community rallied customers, brought meals, Tony helped with the store, and George organized a small group to deep clean and restock inventory. It was humbling. By day 25, I held the court order in my hands. The signature was stamped dated official. I had temporary custody of Violet. Unless Rebecca could prove I was unfit or dangerous, she would come home to a situation that had irrevocably changed. 5 days. Rebecca would be back in 5 days, and when she walked through that door, everything would shift. The protective silence I'd maintained, the documentation I'd compiled, the legal boundaries I'd drawn, all of it would become real. All of it would become war. But Violet would be safe. And that was worth every bit of the guilt, the regret, the knowledge that my daughter would never forgive me for choosing her child over her. The morning Rebecca came home, I woke at 4. I couldn't sleep. Had lain in bed since midnight watching the numbers on the clock change, feeling my heart keep irregular time. The court documents were on the kitchen table waiting like an executioner's blade. I got up quietly so as not to wake Violet, and in the darkness of the house I made coffee. The cup felt weightless in my hands. Everything had become weightless and impossibly heavy at the same time. 5 days I'd waited for this moment. 5 days of watching the calendar, knowing that whatever had broken between Rebecca and me was about to become visible, legally visible, undeniably visible. I went to Violet's room and looked at her sleeping. One small hand curved against her cheek, her breathing even and deep. At least she was rested. At least she didn't know yet that her mother was coming home to a house transformed. "Today everything changes," I whispered. "But you're safe. That's what matters." At 7 o'clock, my phone lit up. A text from Rebecca landing in 20 minutes. "Heading straight home. Can't wait to see you guys." The exclamation mark felt like it came from another world. At 7:28, a car pulled into the driveway. I watched through the window as Rebecca stepped out, backlit by the early morning sun. She was transformed, sun-tanned, vibrant, radiating the kind of ease that comes from a month of not carrying anyone but yourself. Her hair was longer, or maybe just healthier. Her smile was wide and uncomplicated. She looked like a woman who'd found exactly what she was looking for. She came through the door with her arms open, expecting to embrace her father, the way fathers are supposed to be embraced. I stood and let her hug me, but I didn't hold her the way I used to. I kept my distance in the middle of the embrace, a physical boundary that made her pull back slightly. "Dad," she said, the smile flickering. "What's wrong?" "We need to talk, but first sit down." I'd imagined this moment 1,000 times, but nothing prepared me for watching my daughter's face as she read the temporary custody order. The color drained from her cheeks as she turned pages. Her eyes moved faster and faster, as if she could make the words mean something different by reading them quicker. "What is this?" she whispered. "Dad, what is this you filed against me?" "For Violet," I said calmly, "and for my own protection." Rebecca's voice rose. "You went behind my back. You took me to court while I was in Europe. I protected your daughter while you were in Europe, spending money you don't have on experiences you don't need." The words were firm, but not cruel. They were simply true. "This is insane," Rebecca said, standing up. Her hands were shaking. "I'm her mother, Dad. You can't just take her away from me." I'm not taking her. I'm protecting her. She needed someone present, and you chose to be absent. I deserved a break." "From being a mother?" I asked quietly. "That's not a break, Rebecca. That's abandonment." Rebecca's eyes filled with tears. Not the soft tears of regret, but the hot tears of someone who'd been caught who was angry at the catching. You're punishing me for wanting my own life. I'm protecting a 1-year-old from a situation where both her parents were unavailable. One of us had to show up. It wasn't you. She looked like she was about to respond when Violet cried from upstairs her morning wake-up cry. Rebecca's eyes went to the stairs instinctively, but I was closer to her now, my body naturally moving to intercept. I'm going to get her, Rebecca said, moving past me. Not yet, I said. That night, Rebecca stayed. She'd wanted to leave immediately, take Violet and go to a hotel, but I wouldn't let her. The custody order was temporary, not final, and there were procedures to follow. So she stayed in the guest room, and the house held its breath around us like a trapped thing. The next morning, very early, Rebecca came downstairs with Violet already in her arms. The baby was still groggy, not understanding why her mother was suddenly here, and her grandfather's face was so careful, so controlled. We're leaving, Rebecca said. You're not taking her anywhere without going through the courts, I said. She's my daughter. And I have temporary legal custody. You want to see her, we arrange it with the lawyer. Rebecca's face went white with a kind of rage I'd never seen before. She was opening her mouth to respond when her phone rang. The name on the screen was Colin. She stared at it for a moment, like it might bite her, then answered. Hello. Her voice was small. I couldn't hear what he said, but I watched my daughter's face crumble. Not with anger this time, with something worse. With the understanding that while she'd been in Europe finding herself, she'd managed to lose everything else. She sat down very slowly on the arm of the couch, Violet confused and squirming against her. You can't just... Colin, you can't just leave, Rebecca whispered. Whatever he said next made her realize that he could, and he was, and he already had. I stood in the doorway between the kitchen and living room, watching my daughter discover that the freedom she'd demanded had come with a price she hadn't calculated. That the month away hadn't been a break from her life. It had been the month she'd blown her life apart and didn't even know it. Violet reached for me, confused by her mother's sudden tears. I took her, and Rebecca didn't fight me. She was too busy learning that some doors, once you walk through them, don't open the same way twice. The phone disconnected. Rebecca stood in the kitchen holding it like it might burn her. Her face had gone the color of old paper. I didn't need to hear Colin's words. I could read them in the way her body was folding in on itself. What did he say? I asked quietly. Rebecca's voice came out small. He's not coming back. He met someone in Europe. He doesn't want to be married anymore. He doesn't want... She couldn't finish it. Didn't want to be a father. We both understood what the sentence was supposed to be. She sank onto the kitchen chair, and I watched the moment the understanding hit her completely. She'd left her daughter for a month to save a marriage that Colin had already decided to end. She'd made her choice, and her choice had been for nothing. He planned this, Rebecca whispered. For months. He was just waiting for an excuse. I didn't say what I was thinking, which was that her month away had been exactly the excuse he needed. Instead, I said, I'm sorry. She wasn't looking at me. She was looking at Violet, who was building something with blocks on the living room floor, completely unaware that her parents were simultaneously unraveling in 2 different continents. She doesn't know me, Rebecca said. It wasn't a question. Amber arrived at 10 in the morning with the guilty face of someone who'd already made decisions they regretted. She didn't hug Rebecca. She just stood in the doorway and said, I knew. Rebecca looked up from her coffee, which she'd been staring at without drinking. Knew what? About Colin. I saw things online while we were there. I saw photos, comments. I knew something was wrong. The color drained further from Rebecca's face. And you didn't tell me. Amber's voice shook. Because I didn't want the trip to end. Because the content was perfect. Because I was more interested in the aesthetic of your life falling apart than in actually helping my sister. She sat down heavily. I should have told you. I could have told you. But I wanted those sunset photos, and I wanted the engagement on my posts, and I wanted the narrative that you were this woman reclaiming her life. And Amber's voice broke. I let you walk into a disaster because it made for good material. Rebecca stared at her sister like she was seeing her for the first time. You knew my marriage was breaking, and you posted anyway. Not posted about it, Amber said. Posted around it. Created a story that had nothing to do with the truth. And the people who commented, the people who criticized us online, they were right, Rebecca. They saw through it. And I knew they were seeing through it, and I posted anyway. She pulled out her phone with trembling hands and started going through her accounts. I'm deleting everything. All of it. The social media profiles, the accounts, everything. Because none of it was real and it cost you. It cost you Violet. Amber's hands were shaking so badly she could barely navigate the screens, but she kept going. Photos of European cafes vanishing, sunset shots disappearing, the curated version of freedom dissolving. Rebecca watched her sister systematically destroy the narrative they'd built together, and the weight of understanding seemed to crush her further into the chair. I left her, Rebecca said quietly. I left my daughter to save a marriage that was already dead. I left her with Walter because I thought I could fix things with Colin, and he used my leaving as permission to leave too. She looked at Violet, who was now trying to stack blocks higher than her own head, humming to herself, oblivious. She doesn't recognize me as her mother anymore, Rebecca said. She recognizes you. She meant me. I wanted to deny it, but I'd watched it happen. Violet reached for me first now, called for me in the night, trusted me in a way that meant Rebecca had truly become a stranger. I sacrificed her for nothing, Rebecca said, and then more quietly, I sacrificed her for a man who didn't want me using my sister, who was more interested in the photograph than in my actual life. Amber finished deleting the last account. She set her phone down on the table and put her head in her hands. I'm sorry, she whispered. I'm so sorry. Rebecca looked at the temporary custody order sitting on the counter, the papers that declared Walter her daughter's primary caregiver. She looked at the legal documentation of her own absence, her own failure to show up, and then she looked at her sister, at me, at her daughter playing quietly on the floor, at the wreckage of choices that had seemed so necessary at the time. I see it now, Rebecca said, and the words sounded like they were costing her everything. I see it all. The selfishness, the excuses, the way I convinced myself I deserved something more important than her. The way I let other people call in Amber the endless scroll of someone else's version of my life, tell me what I wanted instead of actually wanting my daughter. She wrapped her arms around herself. I've lost her. The custody order says I get supervised visitation, but really, I've lost her. Violet looked up from her blocks, then sensing maybe the shift in the room's emotion. She watched her mother crying, confused by the intensity of feeling from an adult she barely recognized. And it seemed to break something final in Rebecca. But maybe, and I only thought this because I'd spent a month learning that some breakings are necessary, maybe from this breaking, she might actually begin to understand what it meant to be someone's mother. Maybe from this collapse, she could actually build something real. I picked up Violet, and she settled immediately against my chest, already seeking the familiar heartbeat of the person who'd stayed. If you're following along this far, comment. I want to know what Walter does next, so I know you're waiting for what's about to happen. Note, what comes next is real but retold to teach a lesson. If you're not ready for raw family conflict, please exit now. The evening of the 31st, Rebecca tried to take Violet. Not with anger, with desperation. She'd been sitting in the living room for hours after her breakdown, watching her daughter play with blocks. and something in her face had shifted from devastation to determined panic, the look of someone running out of time. "I'm taking her," Rebecca said, standing suddenly. "She's my daughter. I'm taking her." I'd been expecting this. "No, you're not. You can't keep her from me." "Actually," I said quietly, "I can, until a judge says otherwise, and the judge already has." I held up the custody order. Her eyes moved over it like she was reading her own sentence. "I'm using the law to protect her from the chaos you created," I said. "Not to punish you, to keep her safe." Rebecca reached for Violet, but the child pulled back and came to me instead. At 1-year-old, Violet understood what the adults were only beginning to, that her grandfather was where safety lived now. Rebecca's hands dropped. She doesn't even know me." "No," I said, and the words felt like they were cutting something vital in both of us. "She doesn't. And that's the price of running from responsibility." The next morning, Rebecca tried again. She came downstairs with what looked like determination, and before I could stop her, she'd scooped Violet up and was heading for the door. I moved faster than my 70-year-old body should have allowed, blocking her path. "Put her down. She's my daughter. She's also a child who doesn't recognize you as her mother." She reached for me. "She pulled away from you. Look at her." Violet was stiff in Rebecca's arms, confused and uncomfortable. Her small body was telling the truth that words couldn't hide. This woman was a stranger. "This is what abandonment looks like," I said, and I watched the words land like stones. But not the kind that happens all at once. The kind that happens over time when someone chooses something else, always something else, instead of showing up. Rebecca set Violet down. The child immediately came to me. At noon, Officer Brian Mitchell arrived. He was the same officer who'd been mentioned in the complaint, a man in his 50s with the kind of professional composure that came from having to deliver difficult truths regularly. He read the custody order aloud in a neutral voice, confirming what the papers had already said. Walter Hendrick had temporary legal custody. Rebecca's visitation was supervised only. "You can't remove the child without the custodial parent's permission," he said, not unkindly. "The court order is clear on that." Rebecca sank onto the couch like the floor had given way. The law itself had just told her what she couldn't do. It wasn't just me anymore. It was the entire system reflecting back what she'd done. Officer Mitchell left. The house settled back into silence. That afternoon, Rebecca stood at the front door, not trying to leave with Violet, just standing there looking at the threshold between inside and outside, between what she'd been and what she might become. Her face was blotched from crying. Her hands were empty. She looked like someone who'd finally understood the weight of what she'd set down. "I'm sorry, Dad," she said, and it was the first time I'd heard genuine apology in her voice instead of defensiveness or panic. "I'm truly sorry. I didn't soften immediately. Apologies are cheap when consequences are real." "I know you are." "I left her," Rebecca continued. "I left her for something that didn't even exist. I destroyed my marriage. I lost my daughter. I hurt you." "Yes," I said. "You did." She flinched at my refusal to ease her burden. "But that's what love sometimes looks like, not making it better, but making it real." "She can visit," I said finally. "Supervised. By me or George or Rosalind. You'll come here, spend time with her, and you'll do it every week. No excuses, no last-minute cancellations. You'll show up even when it's hard, especially when it's hard." "That's all. That's the beginning," I said. "Trust is earned, Rebecca, not given. Your daughter doesn't know you as her mother anymore, but maybe over time, with consistent presence and genuine care, she can come to know you again. Maybe she can forgive you." Rebecca's eyes filled again. "And will you forgive me?" I looked at my daughter, this woman who'd hurt me, who'd abandoned her own child, who was finally beginning to understand. I already have. The moment you came back and had to face what you'd done. But forgiveness doesn't erase consequences. It just means I won't hate you for being human and flawed. I don't deserve— No, I said. You don't. But you're getting it anyway. That's grace, Rebecca. That's what comes after you finally stopped making excuses. We stood there in the doorway, a locked door between us and the outside world. Behind me, Violet was playing with blocks, unaware that her entire future had just shifted slightly, not back to what it was. Doors didn't open the same way twice, but toward something that might, with time and honesty and daily effort, become real again. Every day, Rebecca whispered. I'll come every day if you let me. Start with once a week, I said. Prove you mean it before you promise more. That evening, alone in my room after Rebecca had left, I sat on the edge of my bed and understood something that had been forming since the moment I'd held Violet in the hospital, since the night I'd signed those papers at 3 a.m, since the moment I'd realized that protecting a granddaughter and loving a daughter weren't opposite things at all. They were one thing. They were the same thing. Loving Rebecca meant protecting Violet. Protecting Violet meant sometimes saying no to Rebecca. And eventually, if Rebecca learned what it meant to be responsible for another person's life, she might finally understand why her father had locked that door. Not to keep her out, but to keep her daughter safe. And maybe that was the greatest love I could show them both. The day after the porch confrontation, Rebecca was gone. She'd packed a bag that evening quietly, deliberately, and left before dawn. I found a note on the kitchen counter. Thank you for telling me the truth. I need to think. That was all. Violet missed her immediately. Not with the panic of abandonment, but with the simple, honest confusion of a child. Where was Mama? I held her while she fussed, sang the lullaby. Did everything I could to manage both her need and my own exhaustion. My chest felt tight, not with the cardiac symptoms Dr. Webb had warned about, but with the weight of knowing I'd finally told Rebecca what she needed to hear. And now I had no idea what she would do with it. 2 days passed. 30 hours of silence. Then my phone rang on the afternoon of day 31. Grandpa. Her voice was small, uncertain. Can I come home? Not asking if she could visit, not asking to see Violet. Home. Where are you? I asked. I drove to a motel near the highway. I've been sitting in the room since yesterday morning just thinking about what you said, about how I ran away, about how Violet kept waiting for me. She paused. I can't do that again. I can't leave her again, and I don't have anywhere else to go. I know I don't deserve— Come home, I said. We'll figure it out from here. She arrived 2 hours later, her car pulling into the driveway, just as I was settling Violet for an afternoon nap. Rebecca came inside carrying the same bag she'd packed 36 hours earlier. She looked diminished, not weakened, but stripped down. The defiance was gone. The brightness that had masked her fear was gone. What remained was raw and uncertain, and oddly that made her more real than I'd ever seen her. Violet's sleeping, I said. We should talk. We sat in the kitchen. Outside, the light was that particular shade of golden gray that happens just before evening. Rebecca wrapped her hands around a cup of tea I'd made for her, not drinking it, just holding it. I can't stay here and pretend nothing happened, I began. And I can't let you pretend you'll fix this overnight. But Violet needs her mother. The real version of you, not the one performing, not the one running, but the one who's willing to stay and do the hard work. I want that, Rebecca said. I don't know how, but I want to be that person. Then here's what will happen, I continued. You stay here. You live in this house. You help me with Violet, the real work, not just the easy parts. You follow the custody schedule the court puts in place, and you get a therapist." "Okay," she said immediately. "It won't be quick," I said. "It won't be comfortable. You'll feel guilty every day for a while. You'll want to give up. But you won't, because Violet is worth the discomfort." Rebecca nodded, tears streaming down her face, but she didn't look away. That evening when Violet woke, I brought her to the kitchen. She saw Rebecca and her whole body went rigid, that moment of confusion when expectation meets reality after abandonment. Then recognition clicked in. "Mama," she said, uncertain. "Hi, baby," Rebecca whispered. She didn't reach for Violet. She let Violet come to her, and slowly, cautiously, Violet climbed into her lap. Week 2 brought Claudia Morrison back to the house, this time with divorce papers. Rebecca sat at the kitchen table while I watched from the doorway. Colin had signed without argument, his attorney eager, his mood lighter. He wanted out. The papers made it official: separation, then dissolution. Custody would be temporary for now, supervised visitation, arranged through the court. Rebecca read the terms without flinching. 2 hours twice a week in a designated setting. A monitor present. The most restrictive arrangement, the one that acknowledged the risk she'd posed. "I understand," she said to Claudia. "When do I start?" "Monday," Claudia replied. The first supervised visit is scheduled for 2 p.m. at the Family Services Center. After Claudia left, Rebecca came to find me in the living room. Violet was playing with blocks, building nothing in particular, just exploring. "That's going to be hard," I said. "Knowing someone is watching, knowing you're being tested." "I deserve it," Rebecca replied, and she wasn't saying it with self-pity. She was stating fact. Week 3 was when the real work began. Rebecca started therapy on Tuesday. Dr. Hendrix's office was across town, and for those 2 hours twice a week, I watched Violet while Rebecca drove there to sit with a stranger and untangle the knot of herself. On Thursday of that week, Rebecca came home from her session quieter than usual. She found me on the porch, where I'd taken to sitting in the evenings, watching the street like a man waiting for something I couldn't name. "Dr. Hendrix asked me something," Rebecca said, sitting beside me. "She asked what I was so afraid of that I needed to run away from everything." I waited, and I realized. Rebecca continued, her voice steady. "I wasn't running from Violet. I wasn't even running from being a mother. I was running from myself, from the fact that I'm ordinary, that my life won't be extraordinary, that I'll never be the person in magazines or on those accounts people follow. I thought if I could just escape long enough, I could become someone different." She looked at me. "But you can't escape yourself. I brought me to Rome. I brought me to Paris, and I was still angry there, still afraid." "What changed?" I asked. "Sitting in a motel room for 30 hours, she said. "Facing the fact that I'd abandoned my baby for that. For the idea that my life wasn't good enough as it was. It took hitting bottom to realize I was wrong." I reached over and squeezed her hand. Week 4 arrived quietly. It was a Tuesday morning, the kind of ordinary moment that only becomes extraordinary in retrospect. Rebecca was changing Violet's diaper, singing softly, the lullaby Mary used to sing, the one I'd sung through countless nights alone. Violet reached up, touching her mother's face with the certainty of a child who'd found something she'd lost. "Mama," Violet said. Clear, definite, full of recognition. Rebecca froze. I watched from the doorway as something broke open in her, not the frantic, guilty tears from the porch, but something deeper. She pulled Violet close, holding her like she'd been given something irreplaceable back because she had. Violet, not understanding why her mother was crying, patted her cheek and said the word again and again. "Mama, mama, mama." I left them alone. Week 5 brought Dr. Webb's office call. My follow-up appointment was routine, now different from the emergency room visit, different from the cardiac ward. Dr. Webb reviewed my latest tests, compared them to the ones from my hospital stay, and allowed himself a small, satisfied smile. "Your heart is stable," he said. "The arrhythmia has resolved completely. Your blood pressure is excellent. Whatever you've changed, stress reduction, I'm assuming keep doing it." I didn't tell him that the stress hadn't disappeared. Rebecca was still here. The custody case was still moving through the system. The weight of rebuilding a family hadn't lifted, but the difference was that I was no longer carrying it alone. Rebecca was learning to carry her share. Violet had her mother back, and that the distribution of the weight, the sharing of responsibility, that had changed everything. Week 6 brought the custody order. I opened it on a Friday afternoon and read the judge's conclusion: temporary custody was to become permanent. Supervised visitation could transition to unsupervised. Rebecca could take Violet for the full 2-hour visit alone without a monitor present. The court had reviewed her therapy notes, her attendance record, the daycare workers' observations, Claudia's reports. The evidence supported a conclusion: Rebecca was changing. That evening, I told her. We sat on the porch again, the same place where I'd told her the truth about choice, about sacrifice, about what love actually meant. Violet was asleep inside, safe in the room that had become hers, watched over by both of us. "You earned this," I said, handing her the order. Rebecca read it 3 times. Her hands shook. "I don't deserve this," she whispered. "No," I agreed. "You don't. But you're earning it. Every day you stay. Every time you choose responsibility over comfort. Every moment you're present with Violet, instead of running towards something else." She folded the paper carefully and held it against her chest like a talisman. "What happens now?" she asked. "Now you keep going," I said. "You take her alone on Sundays. You keep therapy. You keep building the life you actually have instead of chasing the one you imagined. You show up every day even when it's hard." "And you?" she asked. "What about you, Grandpa? What happens to you?" I looked at her, really looked at her, and saw not the bright, restless girl who'd left a month and a half ago, but the woman she was becoming. Tired, responsible, real. "I get to watch my granddaughter know her mother," I said. "And I get to know that when I'm gone, you'll be here to hold her the way you're learning to hold her now." By week 6, Violet not only accepted Rebecca, she loved her mother again. And Rebecca finally understood what real love meant. I woke at 3 in the morning with Rebecca's tears on my conscience. It wasn't the chest pain I'd learned to fear. It was something heavier, a weight that had nothing to do with my heart, and everything to do with what I'd done to hers. I lay in bed, listening to the house settle around me, and replayed the confrontation on the porch over and over. The things I'd said, the conditions I'd set, the way I'd drawn a line, and made her stand on one side of it while I stood on the other. What if I was too harsh? The thought arrived at 3 in the morning and wouldn't leave. I got up, moved to the kitchen, made coffee I wouldn't drink, and sat at the table in the dark. By daylight, Rebecca had been crying for 3 weeks straight. Not the frantic, panicked tears from the day I'd confronted her. These were quieter, deeper. The tears of someone carrying guilt so heavy she could barely stand under its weight. I watched her with Violet, the way she moved carefully, like she was afraid of breaking something. The way her hands trembled when she changed a diaper. The way she whispered apologies to a child who couldn't understand them. "I'm sorry, baby. I'm sorry I left. I'm sorry I wasn't here." And I thought, have I broken her? Tuesday morning, she was in the kitchen preparing breakfast, something she'd learned to do over the past 3 weeks. Eggs, toast, the simple meal made with careful precision. She set a plate in front of me and I saw her hands shake as she poured coffee. "You okay, Grandpa?" she asked, not meeting my eyes. I looked at her, really looked at her, and saw something that terrified me. Not anger, not defiance, not the bright, restless energy that had defined her before. What I saw was erasure. A daughter systematically erasing herself, atom by atom, in what she believed was penance. "I'm fine," I lied. But I wasn't fine. I was drowning in doubt. That afternoon, when Violet napped, Rebecca went to her room. I heard the door close softly. I sat in the living room and wondered for the 100th time, did I do the right thing? Or did I destroy her while trying to save her granddaughter? The question had no answer. Or rather, it had too many answers depending on which day I asked it, which moment I examined, which version of love I was willing to believe in. By Wednesday, I couldn't carry the doubt alone anymore. I called George. He arrived Thursday afternoon, letting himself in through the front door the way he'd done for 43 years. He was carrying a casserole Margaret had made her way of saying, "We're here for you." And he knew the moment he saw my face that something had shifted. We sat in the living room while Violet played with blocks. Rebecca was in the other room, staying small, staying out of the way. "I'm wondering if I was too hard on her," I said without preamble. "Rebecca, I told her she had to stay, had to do the work, had to face what she'd done. And now she's disappearing. Every day she's becoming smaller, and I'm wondering if I pushed her so hard that I broke something that can't be fixed." George didn't answer immediately. He watched Violet stack a block on top of another block, watched her concentrate with the seriousness of a child building something that mattered. "Walter," he said finally, "when my daughter turned 16, she wanted to take my car to a party. I said no, she had her license, she was a careful driver, but I knew the kids who'd be there, and I knew what would happen. I waited. She cried for days," George continued. "Called me controlling, said I didn't trust her, said I was ruining her life, and I wondered exactly like you're wondering now if I was too hard, if I was pushing her away by setting a boundary." He paused, letting the weight of the story settle. A year later, she was at a party with those same kids. The driver got drunk. They went into a ditch. Nobody died, but it was close. And my daughter called me from the hospital parking lot and said, "Thank you for saying no." George looked at me directly. "The tears Rebecca is crying aren't because you're cruel," he said. They're because she's finally understanding what she nearly lost. That's not damage, Walter. That's waking up." I nodded, but something in me still resisted. "But what if she can't come back from this?" I asked. "What if she's too broken now?" "Then you help her back," George said simply. "But you don't do it by pretending she didn't break herself. You do it by standing firm in what you know is right, and trusting that she'll find her way back to you." We sat in silence for a moment. "Sometimes," George said, "the most loving thing you can do is set a boundary. It feels cruel in the moment. It feels like you're the villain in her story. But what you're actually doing is saying, 'I love you too much to let you destroy yourself, and I love you enough to wait while you figure out who you actually are.'" After George left, I was less certain, but more steady. Not convinced that everything would be fine. I wasn't naive enough for that. But reminded that doubt itself wasn't evidence of wrongdoing. That love sometimes looks like cruelty from the inside. That the weight Rebecca was carrying wasn't something I'd put on her shoulders. It was the weight of her own choices, and she had to learn to carry it. I found Rebecca in the kitchen preparing dinner. She looked up when I came in, and I saw the fear in her eyes. Fear that I was angry. Fear that I was doubting her again. Fear that she still wasn't enough. I didn't know what to say to fix that fear. I wasn't sure it could be fixed. Only time and consistent presence could do that. So I did the only thing I knew. I stayed. I sat at the kitchen table and watched her cook. I let her know through my simple presence that I hadn't abandoned her, even though I'd set a boundary. "Violet will wake up soon," Rebecca said quietly. "She'll want dinner." "Yes," I said. "She will." And in that moment I understood what George had been trying to tell me. The doubt wouldn't go away. The guilt wouldn't disappear. But standing in that guilt, holding it without running from it, refusing to absolve myself or to condemn myself, that was the beginning of wisdom. Rebecca continued cooking, and I sat with the knowledge that I might have been too harsh. I might have broken something, but I might also have saved something, and I wouldn't know which one was true until much later, if at all. For now I could only stay and wait and trust that if I'd planted the right seeds, they would eventually grow, even if the growth was slow, even if it looked like dying at first. The park was quiet on Sunday afternoon. October light, mild golden, the kind that makes you want to hold still forever. Rebecca pushed Violet on the swing. The child's legs kicked in rhythm, small hands gripping the chains. Back and forth. Simple, repetitive, the kind of motion mothers had been doing for generations. Then Violet laughed. Not uncertain testing. Real laughter, full, unburdened, the sound of a child who decided the world was worth trusting again. It echoed across the playground, bright and clean, the first laugh like that in 7 weeks. Not since Rebecca had left. Rebecca's face crumpled. She kept pushing, tears streaming down her face. With each forward swing, I heard her whisper things, apologies, promises. The desperate, grateful love of someone who'd nearly lost everything. "More, Mama, more," Violet called. Rebecca pushed, crying, while her daughter laughed. I stood at the edge, giving them space. Not hovering, just present, just witnessing. After a few more pushes, Rebecca slowed the swing. Violet's laughter faded into giggles as the arc grew smaller. Rebecca lifted her down and held her close. Violet wrapped her arms around Rebecca's neck without hesitation. Not tentative. A genuine hug from a child who'd chosen to love. Rebecca kissed the top of Violet's head, shoulders shaking. She set Violet down gently, and the child ran toward the sandbox with easy confidence, knowing the people who loved her would still be there. I walked toward Rebecca slowly. She saw me and something shifted in her expression. Not fear, recognition. She waited, and when I reached her, she reached out and took my hand. "I will rebuild this trust," she said, her voice thick and broken. "I will earn back this trust. Every day for the rest of my life." I squeezed her hand gently, steady, present. "I know," I replied. "I know." In that moment, I understood what I hadn't seen through the doubt of Task 11. My confrontation hadn't been harsh. It had been necessary. I hadn't broken Rebecca. I'd cracked open the shell she'd built so she could see what was inside. The weight she carried wasn't damage I'd inflicted. It was responsibility she'd finally learned to carry. I watched her watch Violet build castles in the sandbox. The child's hands were quick, precise, absorbed in creation. She didn't look back at her mother every few seconds anymore. She knew Rebecca was there. That was enough. "She's really happy," Rebecca whispered. "Yes," I said. "I almost lost this," Rebecca continued. "I almost lost her. I almost lost us." "But you didn't," I said. "Only because you didn't let me," Rebecca said, and there was no resentment, only deep gratitude. I didn't respond immediately, because what she said wasn't entirely true, and we both knew it. I had set a boundary. I had insisted on consequences, but I hadn't forced her across it. I'd drawn a line and trusted that when she saw what she was about to lose, she would choose to come back. And she had. "I didn't force you," I said finally. I protected Violet enough that you could see what you were about to lose. The rest coming back, doing the work, learning to be present, that was you. Rebecca squeezed my hand. It feels like you saved me. No, I said. I gave you the chance to save yourself. That's different. We stood together watching Violet build castles that would inevitably fall. But the child wasn't afraid of that. She was absorbed in the work of building, not attached to the outcome. I thought about the doubt, the guilt, the fear that I'd been too harsh, about George's wisdom. And I understood the doubt hadn't been wrong. It had been necessary. The price of loving someone enough to set a boundary instead of enabling them. But the proof was here, in Violet's laugh, in Rebecca's tears, in the way she held my hand like an anchor in a storm she'd finally survived. For the first time since the porch confrontation, I truly believed my daughter had come home. Not because I'd forced her, not because I'd guilted her, but because I'd loved her enough, and Violet enough, to insist on truth even when it hurt. In protecting what mattered most, I'd given Rebecca back to herself. The sun was lowering. Soon we'd have to leave. Violet would be hungry. But for now, we stood in golden light, 3 generations of a family that had nearly broken but had learned instead to hold. Violet called out, "Mama, Grandpa, look what I made!" We walked toward her together, Rebecca's hand still in mine. For the first time, I truly believed my daughter had come home, not because I forced her, but because I'd loved her enough to protect what mattered most. And in doing that, I'd given Rebecca back to herself. The park was transformed. Tables, chairs, a small tent. Decorations catching the light. A birthday party for Violet, 1-year-old today. Rebecca stood near the cake watching people arrive in waves, our tide. The people who'd held us when we were drowning. Tony came first, carrying a wrapped gift. He'd cut his hair, dressed carefully. There was something different about him, steadiness, that hadn't been there before. "I'm starting a counseling program," he told me, "to help families before everything breaks." Dr. Webb arrived with his wife, kind-eyed, unobtrusive. He pulled me aside. "You look better than expected, Walter." "I am," I said. George and Rosalind came together. Anne and Barbara followed with toys and laughter. Claudia arrived in a dress too nice for a park picnic. She found me and stood beside me without saying anything. She didn't have to. Amber came late with a recording device. "Documenting real motherhood stories now," she said. "Not the Instagram version. The hard truth. People need to hear you can fail and come back." Father James arrived last in clerical collar, carrying blessing and hope. We gathered as afternoon light turned golden. Violet sat in Rebecca's lap, confused by attention, but delighted by cake. Rebecca fed her a piece and frosting covered the child's face. "Perfect." Father James raised his hands. "I've been thinking about what Walter taught us," he said, his voice carrying across the park. "About what love means." Everyone quieted. Even Violet paused. Now Walter had a choice. Father James continued. When Rebecca left, he could have called her back immediately. Made it easy. Become the comfortable grandparent who enables instead of protects. He looked at Rebecca, but he didn't. He understood sometimes the most loving thing is saying no. Sometimes protection looks like cruelty from inside. Sometimes the deepest compassion wears the mask of firmness. Walter didn't save Rebecca from her choices. He protected her daughter enough that Rebecca could see what those choices cost. He made the sign of the cross over us, a blessing for this child's birthday and for this family's resurrection. Words older than time. About grace, second chances, the hard work of love. After he finished, Anne began clapping. George joined her. Soon everyone was clapping, not politely, but with genuine warmth, recognition of something witnessed and shared. Tony hugged Rebecca, just held her. No words needed. Dr. Webb stood beside me. This is healing, not perfection, just people showing up. Claudia took my hand, not tentatively, with certainty, and I understood my life wasn't finished. There was still time for something new. As afternoon stretched into evening, I watched my family, biological and chosen, celebrate a child's first year. A year that nearly broke us. A year that cracked us open. Violet chased butterflies across the grass, unself-conscious, trusting. The people around her would catch her if she fell. Love was real. Father James found me on a bench. "You did good, Walter," he said. "I don't know," I said. "Sometimes I think I was too harsh." "The hurt came from her own actions," he replied gently. "You just refused to lie about it. That's mercy, not cruelty." I nodded, knowing doubt would return. But I also knew something else: doubt and conviction could live in the same heart. You could question yourself and still stand firm. Rebecca called, "Grandpa, come see what Violet picked." The child held a handful of grass, offering it like treasure. Maybe it was. I walked toward them, looking back at the gathering. At all the people who'd believed in boundaries, consequences, redemption. And I understood what Father James meant. Love wasn't about being comfortable. It was about being present. About saying what needed to be said even when it cost you. About drawing a line and standing firm while someone decided whether to cross it. Every person here had learned that lesson by watching me fail and try again. By watching Rebecca break and rebuild. By watching Violet survive abandonment and love anyway. Each person gathered here understood something new. Love means showing up. And showing up changes everything. The cemetery was quieter in autumn. Leaves turned bronze and gold colors Mary loved. I carried her favorite flowers, daisies, simple and bright. I sat on the bench beside her grave, not at the headstone, but close enough. The bench faced east toward morning light. Mary liked morning light. "Mary," I said, placing the daisies down, "I did something this year. Something I never thought I'd do. I fought with Rebecca. I set boundaries. I made her face consequences." I paused, remembering the porch, the papers, Officer Mitchell. And Mary, it was the best thing I ever did. I could hear her laughing, not in reality, but in memory. That warm, knowing laugh she'd had when she watched me fumble through parenthood decades ago. She'd always known what needed to be done. She'd just waited for me to figure it out. "You would have done it sooner," I said. "But I'm doing it now." A year had passed. 12 months of watching Rebecca become someone real. The performance had fallen away. The brightness masking her fear was gone. What remained was a woman who woke up every morning and chose to show up for her daughter. A woman in therapy. A woman who wasn't running anymore. Violet was nearly 2. She called Rebecca Mama without hesitation, without the tentative quality from those early months. She laughed easily, trusted, without reservation, played in the sandbox without looking back, because she knew her mother was there. Claudia had moved in 6 months ago, slowly, carefully. We weren't lovers the way I'd been with Mary. We were companions, people who'd learned what it meant to show up. She was quiet in the mornings. She made coffee. Sometimes we didn't talk. We just were. I forgave her. I said to Mary, "Rebecca, I don't know exactly when it happened. Sometime between the park and the birthday party, I stopped carrying the anger. Not because she deserved it, but because I needed to put it down." The sun was lowering. Evening was coming. "There's something I understand now," I continued. "Tension is a crisis, but protection is medicine. When I set that boundary, When I insisted on consequences, people called it harsh. Even I did for a while. But it wasn't harsh. It was the most merciful thing I could do. I thought about task 11, the doubt, the weight, the fear that I'd done damage, about George's wisdom, about Father James's blessing. "I think you'd be proud," I said to Mary. "Not just of me, of Rebecca, of the woman she's becoming, the mother she's learning to be." The daisies were already fading. Flowers never lasted long at graves, but for now they sat there, bright, simple, honest, like love, like truth. I stood to leave. Claudia would be waiting at home. Violet had just learned to say Grandpa and said it every 5 minutes, delighted. Rebecca would have dinner ready. We'd sit together, this family that had nearly broken and had learned instead to hold. "I'll be back," I said to Mary. "Not tomorrow. I'm busier now. But I'll be back." I walked down the path toward the gates, toward Claudia waiting at the car. She'd driven me waiting patiently outside. "Ready?" she asked when I reached her. "Yes," I said. As we drove home, I thought about the year that had passed. The crisis, the confrontation, the slow, painful work of rebuilding. Violet laughing on the swing, the gathering in the park. And now this, a year later, all of us still here, still learning what it meant to love. When I held Violet and walked toward Claudia, toward the life I was still living, I understood this is what love looks like. Not easy, not soft, but real, steady, and eternal. The doubts from last week still lingered, but they'd shifted. George's visit, his story about his daughter and the drunk driver, it hadn't erased my uncertainty, but it had changed its shape. Instead of, "Am I doing this wrong?" the question had become, "Can I trust that I did this right?" I'd spent the morning watching Rebecca with Violet. She was quieter now, more present. The performance had fallen away, replaced by something rawer and more honest. She wasn't the bright, restless Rebecca anymore, but she was becoming someone real. By afternoon, I needed to step outside. The weight of it all, the doubt, the love, the fear, the hope was pressing down. So when Rebecca asked if she could take Violet to the park, I said yes, not to give her freedom, but because sometimes people need to prove something to themselves in a space bigger than a house. I followed at a distance, not hovering, not interfering, just there, just witnessing. The park was nearly empty on Sunday afternoon. October light, mild, golden, the kind that makes you want to hold still forever. Rebecca pushed Violet on the swing. The child's legs kicked in rhythm, small hands gripping the chains. Back and forth. Simple, repetitive, the kind of motion mothers had been doing for generations. Then Violet laughed, not uncertain testing. Real laughter, full, unburdened, the sound of a child who'd decided the world was worth trusting again. It echoed across the playground, bright and clean. The first laugh like that in 7 weeks, not since Rebecca had left. Rebecca's face crumpled. She kept pushing, tears streaming down her face. With each forward swing, I heard her whisper things, apologies, promises. The desperate, grateful love of someone who'd nearly lost everything. "More, Mama, more," Violet called. Rebecca pushed, crying, while her daughter laughed. I stood at the edge, giving them space, not hovering, just present, just witnessing. After a few more pushes, Rebecca slowed the swing. Violet's laughter faded into giggles as the arc grew smaller. Rebecca lifted her down and held her close. Violet wrapped her arms around Rebecca's neck without hesitation. Not tentative. A genuine hug from a child who'd chosen to love. Rebecca kissed the top of Violet's head, shoulders shaking. She set Violet down gently, and the child ran toward the sandbox with easy confidence, knowing the people who loved her would still be there. I walked toward Rebecca slowly. She saw me and something shifted in her expression. Not fear, recognition. She waited, and when I reached her, she reached out and took my hand. Consegyan lai niem tin nai. She said, her voice thick and broken. I will earn back this trust, every day for the rest of my life. I squeezed her hand gently. Steady, present. She bo bayet, I replied. I know. In that moment, I understood what I hadn't seen through the doubt of last week. My confrontation hadn't been harsh, it had been necessary. I hadn't broken Rebecca. I'd cracked open the shell she'd built so she could see what was inside. The weight she carried wasn't damage I'd inflicted. It was responsibility she'd finally learned to carry. I watched her watch Violet build castles in the sandbox. The child's hands were quick, precise, absorbed in creation. She didn't look back at her mother every few seconds anymore. She knew Rebecca was there. That was enough. She's really happy, Rebecca whispered. Yes, I said. I almost lost this, Rebecca continued. I almost lost her. I almost lost us. But you didn't, I said. Only because you didn't let me, Rebecca said, and there was no resentment, only deep gratitude. I didn't respond immediately. Because what she said wasn't entirely true, and we both knew it. I had set a boundary. I had insisted on consequences, but I hadn't forced her across it. I'd drawn a line and trusted that when she saw what she was about to lose, she would choose to come back. And she had. I didn't force you, I said finally. I protected Violet enough that you could see what you were about to lose. The rest, coming back, doing the work, learning to be present, that was you. Rebecca squeezed my hand. It feels like you saved me. No, I said. I gave you the chance to save yourself. That's different. We stood together watching Violet build castles that would inevitably fall, but the child wasn't afraid of that. She was absorbed in the work of building, not attached to the outcome. I thought about the doubt, the guilt, the fear that I'd been too harsh, about George's wisdom. And I understood the doubt hadn't been wrong. It had been necessary. The price of loving someone enough to set a boundary instead of enabling them. But the proof was here, in Violet's laugh, in Rebecca's tears, in the way she held my hand like an anchor in a storm she'd finally survived. For the first time since the porch confrontation, I truly believed my daughter had come home. Not because I'd forced her, not because I'd guilted her, but because I'd loved her enough, and Violet enough to insist on truth even when it hurt. In protecting what mattered most, I'd given Rebecca back to herself. The sun was lowering. Soon we'd have to leave. Violet would be hungry. But for now, we stood in golden light, 3 generations of a family that had nearly broken but had learned instead to hold. Violet called out, "Mama, Grandpa, look what I made." We walked toward her together, Rebecca's hand still in mine. For the first time, I truly believed my daughter had come home, not because I forced her, but because I'd loved her enough to protect what mattered most. And in doing that, I'd given Rebecca back to herself. I watched Rebecca leave for work on a Tuesday morning. She carried a lunch she'd packed herself, salad, sandwich, fruit. Professional clothes, nothing flashy. She kissed Violet goodbye, hugged Claudia, and caught my eye as she headed toward the door. "See you Wednesday," she said. Wednesday was our night. Every Wednesday at 7 we had dinner together, just the 2 of us. No performance, no pretense. Just a father and daughter learning how to be in the same room again. She'd taken the job at the dental office reluctantly. Not because she didn't want to work, but because she was afraid she wouldn't be a good mother if she wasn't home every day. But Claudia had helped her understand that presence wasn't measured by hours, it was measured by attention. And Rebecca could be fully present for 4 hours after work, then half-heartedly present for 10. I'd watched her through the waiting room window one afternoon, not creeping, but honest observation. A patient had come in looking anxious. Rebecca had sat beside her, explained the procedure in a calm, steady voice. The woman's shoulders had relaxed. When they were done, the patient had hugged Rebecca. Not the polite hug you give a service provider. A real hug. The kind you give someone who saw you and cared about your fear. Her co-workers respected her. I'd heard it from Claudia, who sometimes ran into Rebecca's supervisor at the grocery store. "Rebecca's the kind of person you want in a crisis," the supervisor had said. "She doesn't panic. She just shows up and does what needs to be done." That was new. The old Rebecca, the one who'd left for Europe, had been bright and brittle. The new Rebecca was quiet and solid. At night, after Violet was asleep, Rebecca sat at the kitchen table and wrote in a journal. Not for herself, though she did write therapy observations there too, but for Violet. Letters to her future self. Explanations of why Mama had left, what that meant, how she'd come back, and how she was learning to stay. "Dear Violet," I'd glimpsed one entry. "I want you to understand that sometimes people make mistakes, big ones. But mistakes don't define you. What defines you is what you do after you realize you've failed. Today I realized I'm still learning how to be your mother. And that's okay. That's actually the most honest thing I can say." George's wife, Rosalind, had told me that Rebecca came to their house sometimes. Not to visit me, though she did that too, but to learn from Rosalind and Anne. How to soothe a crying baby, how to set limits without guilt, how to love fiercely without performing. Anne had taken Rebecca under her wing in a way that surprised me. "She reminds me of myself at that age," Anne had said once. "Wanting so badly to escape, thinking freedom meant running away. She needs to know that the deepest freedom is choosing to stay." Rebecca was learning. Slowly. Not perfectly. There were still nights when I could hear her crying in her room, carrying the weight of what she'd done. But the crying had changed too. Instead of the gasping, panicked tears from those early days, these were quiet tears. The kind that come from grief you're finally able to process instead of running from. Wednesday came around again. Rebecca arrived at 6:50, exactly 10 minutes early. She'd started doing that, arriving early, being punctual, showing respect for time and commitment. Small things, but they meant something. We sat at the kitchen table. Claudia had made her famous lasagna and then tactfully excused herself to read upstairs. It was just Rebecca and me. "How was work?" I asked. "Good," she said. There was a patient who was terrified of the dentist. I spent an extra 20 minutes just talking to her, explaining the procedure, letting her ask questions. She felt safe after that. "You're good at that," I said. "Making people feel safe." Rebecca paused, fork in her hand. "I wasn't always," she said quietly. "I was the opposite. I made people, especially Violet, feel abandoned." I didn't contradict her. She needed to acknowledge what she'd done. "But I'm trying to be different now," she continued. "Every day I try to be the kind of person Violet can trust. The kind of person you can trust." We ate in comfortable silence for a while. Then Rebecca said, "I wrote something for Violet yesterday, in the journal. Do you want to hear it?" "Yes," I said. She pulled out a worn notebook, the one she'd been filling for the past year. She flipped to a recent entry and read, "Dear Violet, today, Grandpa and I had dinner. He looked at me with something that felt like pride. Not because I'm perfect, I'm not, but because he saw me trying, because he saw me stay. That's what I want you to know about love, Violet. It's not about being perfect. It's about staying even when you want to run. It's about choosing the person you're becoming over the person you thought you wanted to be." I didn't say anything. I couldn't. Rebecca closed the notebook and looked at me. I think I'm finally ready to forgive myself, she said. Not today, maybe, but someday soon. You're already doing it, I said. Every time you show up, every time you choose Violet over escape. That's not someday. That's now. After Rebecca left that night, I sat on the porch alone. Claudia was upstairs, the house was quiet, and I thought about the woman my daughter had become. She wasn't the bright, restless Rebecca anymore, the one who'd believed happiness meant running away from responsibility. She wasn't the shattered, guilty Rebecca from those early weeks, either the one who'd thought she could destroy herself through penance. She was someone new, someone real, someone who'd learned that freedom wasn't about escaping who you are. It was about finally becoming who you actually were. Rebecca was no longer the woman who'd fled to Europe, but she was no longer the broken woman on the porch either. She had finally become completely Rebecca. And that was enough. Dr. Webb's office smelled like disinfectant and possibility. I sat on the examination table while he reviewed my latest tests. Blood pressure, heart rate, cholesterol, all the numbers that had terrified me a year and a half ago. 140/85, he said, looking up from the chart. That's normal, Walter. Actually better than normal for someone your age. What changed? I asked, though I thought I knew. You did, he said simply. Stress reduction, movement, purpose. Whatever happened in your life, keep doing it. I was doing exactly that. The hardware store had become something I managed rather than something that owned me. My son-in-law, well soon to be ex-husband of my daughter, but he'd stayed involved in the business, and I had hired a manager, a young man named David, who had the kind of energy and vision I'd been trying to force into exhaustion. Now, instead of working 60-hour weeks, I came in 3 days a week. I made the major decisions. I mentored David, and I left time for the rest of my life. The store was thriving. Last quarter had been our best in 5 years. Success felt different when it didn't cost you your health. But health was only part of the equation. Claudia was in the waiting room. She'd driven me to the appointment, waiting patiently with a book, while Dr. Webb poked and prodded me. When I came out, she looked up from her pages and smiled. Good news, she asked. Good news. I confirmed. We drove home in comfortable silence. That was one of the things I'd come to love about Claudia. She didn't need constant conversation. She was content to just be present. I'd never expected to love again. Mary had been my wife for 45 years. When she died, I'd thought that chapter was closed. But then Claudia had arrived in our kitchen with casserole and kind eyes, and something in me had shifted. It wasn't the same as what I'd had with Mary. It was quieter, more aware of its own fragility and preciousness. We were two people in the autumn of our lives choosing each other, not because we were young and foolish, but because we were old enough to know what mattered. I've been thinking about something, I said to Claudia as we drove. About what? She asked. It's about the fact that I'm 70 years old, and I'm in love, I said. I didn't think that was possible anymore. I thought that chapter of my life was over. Claudia reached over and took my hand. She didn't say anything. She didn't have to. But you see me, I continued. Not just the parts that are still strong, the parts that are tired, the parts that are scared, the parts that made terrible mistakes. You see all of it, and you choose to be here anyway. That's what love is, Claudia said quietly. At any age. That evening I visited Mary's grave alone. I did this sometimes now, less often than before, but with a different quality of presence. Not carrying guilt or confusion, just gratitude. I wanted you to know, I said sitting on the bench, that I'm happy. Truly happy. In a way I didn't think I'd be again after you. The wind moved through the trees. Leaves fell. The cemetery was beautiful in its way, this place of endings and peace. Claudia makes me laugh, I continued. She reads to me, she sits with me, and I think you'd approve. I think you'd be glad I'm not spending my remaining years in loneliness. Father James had told me something during one of our conversations at the church. He'd been speaking about second chances, about God's grace, though I knew he used those words differently than I did. And he'd said, "Walter, love is never wasted. The love you gave Mary shaped who you are. And who you are is someone capable of loving Claudia. See, nothing is wasted." I carried that thought with me now to the hardware store, to dinner with Rebecca and Violet, to quiet evenings with Claudia on the porch. Life had changed in ways I couldn't have predicted. I'd fought with my daughter, and we'd come out stronger on the other side. I'd nearly lost my granddaughter, and then watched her thrive. I'd faced my own mortality, and discovered I still had years to live. And I'd found love again when I thought that door had closed forever. Claudia was waiting on the porch when I got home from the cemetery. She'd made tea her evening ritual. We sat together as the sun lowered, and I thought about how strange and beautiful life was, how you could lose everything and find something better, how you could be 70 years old and still be surprised by joy. "Thank you," I said to Claudia. "For what?" she asked. "For being here, for seeing me, for making it possible for me to imagine a future that isn't just about managing the past." She squeezed my hand. "And thank you," I continued, speaking half to Claudia, half to Mary, half to the universe, "for showing me that at 70 you can still find reasons to believe in tomorrow, and have someone to believe in it with." Claudia had shown me that at 70 years old, you can still find reasons to believe in tomorrow, and have someone to share that belief with. That alone was worth the entire journey. I'm going to step outside the story now. Not to distance myself from what happened, but to speak to you directly. Because what I learned through crisis, through nearly losing everything, is too important to keep contained in a personal narrative. You might be reading this because you're in a similar situation. Maybe you're a grandparent raising a grandchild. Maybe you're a parent watching your own child make choices that terrify you. Maybe you're someone who's been abandoned by someone you love and you're wondering if you should have fought harder to make them stay. I want to tell you something clearly. Protection and boundaries are not cruelty. They are love. Our culture will tell you that real love is always soft, always forgiving, always saying yes. We're taught that boundaries are selfish, that insisting on consequences is harsh, that protecting what matters most is somehow wrong. But I'm here to tell you, that's a lie. When I set a boundary with my daughter, when I told her she couldn't abandon her child, without facing the weight of that choice, I was terrified. I thought I was being cruel. I thought I was damaging our relationship beyond repair. I thought maybe the world was right, and I was the villain for not simply accepting her choices and moving on. But do you know what I learned? Sometimes love looks like cruelty from the inside, because you're willing to be the person your loved ones are angry at in order to protect what matters most. Strength is not never breaking. Strength is breaking and then getting back up. I broke during this year. My body broke. My heart broke, not metaphorically, but literally in a way that required hospitalization. My confidence in myself broke. But I didn't stay broken, and neither did Rebecca. The strength we found wasn't about becoming invincible. It was about becoming resilient. It was about learning that you can fall apart and still be capable of love. You can fail and still be worthy of redemption. You can be terrified and still show up anyway. And here's the thing about community that I discovered. You don't have to carry this alone. When I was drowning, people showed up. George with his story. Father James with his blessing. Claudia with her presence. Anne and Barbara with their steadiness. Tony with his willingness to help. A dental hygienist named Mary, who had the courage to tell the truth. A social worker who filed the papers. An officer who came to enforce boundaries. I was surrounded by people who understood something fundamental, that sometimes the most loving thing you can do for someone is to refuse to enable their self-destruction. But I want to talk about something else too. Love is not freedom. Love is responsibility. This is what my daughter had to learn. She thought love meant escaping responsibility. She thought being a mother meant something she could do when it was convenient, when it felt good, when it fed her sense of self. But love, real love, is choosing someone else's needs over your own comfort. Every single day. It's showing up when you're tired. It's setting limits when you'd rather give in. It's being present even when presence is hard. And here's what nobody tells you. When you finally accept responsibility, instead of running from it, freedom emerges from inside that responsibility. My daughter isn't less free now than she was when she fled to Europe. She's more free. Because she's no longer running from herself. She's no longer performing. She's no longer searching for something external to fix what's broken inside. She's free because she's present. And that presence, that simple, steady presence, is the most profound form of love I know. So if you're reading this and you're wondering if you should set a boundary, if you should insist on consequences, if you should be the person who says no when everyone around you is saying yes, I want to tell you it's okay. It's more than okay. It's necessary. You might lose people. Some relationships might not survive the boundary. That's real, but you'll also create space for deeper, more authentic connections with people who can respect your limits. You might be called selfish. You might be misunderstood. That's also real. But you'll know in your heart that you acted out of love, not out of cruelty. And you might be surprised to discover that the person you were protecting, the grandchild, the person you loved, might look back one day and say thank you. Not immediately, not easily, but eventually they might understand that your boundary was actually the thing that saved them. My final blessing for you is this: I hope you find the strength to set boundaries even when the world tells you not to. I hope you find a community to stand beside you while you do. I hope you discover that presence, just showing up, just being there, is enough. And I hope you come to understand what I finally understand, that love isn't about freedom from responsibility. Love is about finding freedom within responsibility. Love is about choosing someone else day after day, even when it costs you. Love is responsibility fully accepted. And if you understand that, you understand everything. I'm writing this story not to boast, but to warn. 5 years ago, I was a desperate old man, believing that love meant allowing the people I cherished to destroy themselves. I was wrong. Completely wrong. Don't be like me. Don't think that loving someone means staying silent while they harm themselves. Don't let compassion become endless tolerance. Don't wait until a hospital bed forces you to act. God gave me a second chance through crisis. God used pain to open my daughter's eyes. And God taught me that protecting those you love is not cruelty. It is the deepest form of compassion. The lesson from this family drama is simple: love is responsibility, not freedom, not comfort, not what social media tells you to do. Love is standing firm when firmness is necessary. It's saying no when yes causes harm. It's surviving a family drama that once overcome becomes a miracle. I'm not a perfect parent, not a family drama anyone would choose. But I'm a father with boundaries. Because of that, my daughter is a mother. My granddaughter is a loved child. God keeps His promises. Thank you for staying with me this far. Please comment and let me know. Do you agree that sometimes love means setting boundaries? Or do you think differently? Help me understand if you're still walking this journey with me. And fair warning, the next story contains fictional elements constructed for educational and cautionary purposes for families facing similar crises. If you don't want to hear about deep family conflict and family drama, please exit now and choose content more suitable for you.